welcome to another episode of Read It with Whiskey. My name is Laura Juntunen and I am your host. I am the self-published author of the Shockwave series. Book 1, Transient Pulse, and Book 2, Oscillation Rising, are now available to you via Amazon and a few other ebook retailers, so definitely check it out and dive into those books if you have not already. Okay, so today is a very big day because I had set a goal for myself to feature specific authors on this podcast. I'll get into that in the Laura J. Live update, but one of these amazing authors is Kia Carrington-Russell. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest for today's episode. Kia grew up in the Darling Downs region of Queensland, Australia. Graduating high school, she pursued a career in freelance journalism. In 2014, having always had a passion for writing fiction, she decided to follow her dream of becoming an accomplished author. Now living on the Gulf Coast of Australia and traveling every spare minute she gets, Kia is constantly searching for new inspiration for her writing and filling her heart with adventure, one country at a time. Kia is the author of multiple books, and we do dive into it within the interview, but today we are going to be focusing on Token Huntress, the first in a very long series. This is what it's all about. Being born a hunter, Esmore had been raised with one purpose: to hunt and kill the vampire race that destroyed the world as it was known. At 18, Esmore's a token huntress in her guild, surpassing her mentor's expectations of her, despite having no magical ability like other hunters before her. During a raid in the once iconic San Francisco, Esmore's team is ambushed, and a mysterious vampire that she is drawn to captures and takes her to the Vampire Council as a prisoner. Her captor, Chase, a lethal, immortal, sexy, and charming vampire who will stop at nothing to claim her as his familiar. While in captivity, Esmore learns information that makes her question everything she's been taught. This was such a great start to the series, and from our conversation you can tell how excited Kia is about the second book and the rest of the series. It was a really fun conversation, so let's dive into it. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the interview podcast featuring science fiction and fantasy authors. My name is Laura Juntunen, your host and the author of the Shockwave series. I am also a book club moderator, speaker, and avid reader, truly invested in every author's story. Within this podcast, I bring to you, the reader, all the behind-the-scenes secrets to how these guest indie authors bring their books into the world. If you are a sci-fi fantasy reader, then you need to hear from these authors. Let's learn about the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. All right, it's time for a little Laura J. Live update. And as I explained in the episode last time with Irene, I am pre-recording all of these episodes, so the updates that I'm giving you guys are basically guesses of what I hope I am accomplishing. So right now it is towards the ends of October, and my hope is that I have completely planned out Static Equilibrium, which is book 3 in the Shockwave series. So Transient Pulse and Oscillation Rising are out and ready for you to read, and the third book, Static Equilibrium, is something I'm going to be diving into on November 1st for NaNoWriMo. So National Novel Writing Month is what NaNoWriMo stands for, and it's a feat of writing 50,000 words in 30 days. I have done this concept for the first 2 books within the Shockwave series, so I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to get this done with Static Equilibrium as well. We'll see how it goes. So as far as goals and things that are going on right now, I really hope that I have actually plotted out book 3. Because like I said in last episode, I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser. So I will definitely give you guys an update once I bring back the live updates. Okay, something else I wanted to talk to you guys about, I briefly mentioned it in the introduction, is that I had a list of authors that I wanted to feature on the podcast. This list of authors is basically the people that I have looked up to over my writing career, and I have found that they are really exemplary and just display what I want to be in the future. Most of them are near or a little bit further along than I currently am, and a few are way farther along than I am, but they have made an influence on my writing in some way, shape, or form. I know you're all wondering, but no, I am not going to tell you all of the authors that are on the list. I have decided that I am only going to reveal the people who are already scheduled to be on the show, because I don't want to put something out there and then have it be retracted for some odd reason. You know what I mean? I don't want to get y'all hyped up and then steal it from underneath your feet, right? So I'm only going to talk about the authors that I have actually scheduled to be on the podcast. And the first of which is Kia Carrington-Russell, and she is on the show today. So she is on the show because I have found that I love her social media content. I've read one of her books now, Token Huntress, and I plan on reading more. But I really feel that her presence on social media is really, really fun, and she's a part of a lot of different projects. We're going to talk about it within the interview, so I won't dive in now, but I really like what she represents, and she is just a role model for me, so I'm going to definitely follow along with her career. So she is one of the many people on my list who I was fortunate to have featured on the show. Another person who I'm really excited to have on the show is Kristen Martin. And I'm actually going to talk about her at the end of this episode because she is going to be the next episode. So she is the second one who will be featured on the show of this list of authors who I am just like so thrilled about having on the show. And then the third person I'm going to tell you about today is Sasha Black, and she is incredible. She has her own podcast, and she has written not only fiction books, but also nonfiction books to help authors with their careers. So these three authors, Kia Carrington-Russell, Kristen Martin, and Sasha Black, they were all on my list of hopefuls for the future, and I feel so blessed to have them on the show, so I really wanted to share that with you guys today, because it means the world to me that they agreed to be on the show. So we're going to dive into Kia Carrington-Russell's episode today, and then next time we are going to be talking with Kristen Martin, and then we'll come back and talk to Sasha Black at the end of December. So definitely stay tuned. And that is your Laura J. Live update for today. Let's get into the interview. Hello, Kia, and welcome to the Read It with Whiskey podcast. I'm so excited for you to be here today. How are you doing?
I am so excited. I've had way too much coffee and I've just been so excited for this all morning. So thank you for having me.
Yes, and that's so funny because you're way in a different time zone than I am. So you're drinking coffee and I'm drinking my whiskey, but it's going to work out fine.
I might have whiskey in this. We never know. No, I'm kidding. It's 8 a.m. here on a Monday morning. No.
Oh, that's too funny. But no, I'm so excited to talk to you. I found you quite a while ago and then we connected and it just worked out to have you on the show. And I'm just so excited for you to be here. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and why you decided that you wanted to become a writer.
Yeah, so I have been publishing now for about 7 years. I actually started writing when I was 15 years old. So I was a very angsty teenager. I had a lot of things happening in my life and I was reading a lot of Cassandra Clare, and it just really inspired me to sort of take on my own little journey. And I actually found it rather, I want to say therapeutic at the time. I didn't realize what I was doing, but so it was the first big project I kind of ever set my mind to. And so after school, instead of hanging out with friends, I would go home and I would be writing this story. And then by the time I got to my final years, my senior years, I started actually pitching that book to publishers. And you cannot believe my shock when they said no, because I was certain I was the next J.K. Rowling. Yes. And when I look back at that in hindsight, being 17, I don't even think I had it edited. It was terrible. And so it kind of knocked my confidence a little bit, but in a good way, because then come, 2-3 years after that, I decided to look back at it again. And I did that. And then I started publishing, and it's now been 7 years. I think I've published 16, 17 books, written over 20. And I just really found myself very quickly realizing this is what I was passionate about. This is who I was as a young independent woman. And it just really helped me build myself and my career. So I primarily now I've written numerous genres, young adult, young adult contemporary romance, as I was trying to dabble and see what I enjoyed. But now I primarily write the darker, edgier, grittier sort of romance, paranormal fantasy, because I love a am I allowed to swear on here?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I love a kick-ass heroine, and just who has a lot of development on herself, because we all have different kinds of strengths. So I really like to look at more so the mental side of things, because they're physically strong, but there's so many other things that happen inside that we all need to work on, and that's what I really love embellishing on. And then creating these different fantasy worlds where it's really questioning the reality of what we have today as well. So I kind of like, and of course, romance. I'm a sucker for a good romance. So yeah, that's me now today.
I love that. And everything you just said translates so perfectly into the book that I've read of yours, Token Huntress, which we're going to talk about. But I definitely love the strong female lead, and yes, the love story, all the romance, all the nitty gritty stuff. It's just so much fun. But tell us, so you are a full-time author now. So what was that transition like, going from, I really want to be a published author, to working so hard and then finally being able to say, like, this is what I do for work now. This is my career.
It was a long transition, I want to say. I think when I published that first book when I was 19, 20, I was surprised that by the next week I wasn't a multimillionaire. And I think that happens to a lot of authors. Yes. And I wasn't exactly prepared for the amount of work that was about to go into it. At the time, I was working a full-time job. I was also working a part-time job, and I was focusing on my books. And so I actually discovered burnout quite a few times during my careers. And that's fine, lesson learned. But I needed to find better balance, and realizing that some books would have to be delayed in publishing and things like that. So I guess in a sense, it was a steadier pace I had to learn, but it wasn't happening as fast as I would have liked. I'm a very result-driven person. So being able to focus on it full time was amazing, but weird as well, because I really had to adjust. Usually I try and sneak in every single hour that I had. I would wake up at odd hours to write and try and squeeze it in. Whereas when I had an open plate, I was like, okay, well, what can I do here? Or what am I doing? And then I found actually myself less disciplined in a way, because it kind of flooded well, I'm in my PJs, I'm at home, I'm doing this. So I had to find other ways to combat that, where I was still being productive in certain hours, not just doing long days, but actually productive hours. So now I'll go to a cafe or I'll go to a library where I know this is a time to write. I still do the same at home, but if I know I'm going to be easily distracted by either napping or just watching something on Netflix, I'll make sure I leave the house. So I feel like I should add too that recently I have actually picked up a part-time job. And this is only very recently. And that was because I actually needed some extra, not guidance, but sort of because I wasn't being a social person, I want to say. So I was like, okay, I need a couple of hours a week designated to getting out of the house, putting makeup on, being a person, but doing those things. And it's helped me sort of correct that structure. So I think, and this will go for 6 to 12 months until I'm satisfied with my socializing, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then I think it'll help me go back into it, because I think the first time around I wasn't properly prepared for the full-timeness, because it became sort of like a vacation at the same time. But I think next time I'll be better prepared to know what's involved with it, I want to say.
I like that. Very wise choice to make sure that the structure's there. I like it. And then as an author, you have chosen to do self-publishing. Did you have any work traditionally publishing, or are you thinking about doing that further down the road?
Yeah, so both. I haven't yet had anything traditionally published. I want to. The way I love independently publishing, because one, obviously we're in control of that. There's a lot of options that we take on, but also it's not for everything, because it's a big job and it's a big task to do correctly. There's so many small things that we don't consider. And it's not just that, oh, book's published, here it is. There are so many things that are involved afterwards as well. And you never sort of stop nursing that baby, so to speak. It's always there. But I think independently published is, if you want to make money, that's where it is, because you do receive majority of those royalties. Whereas when you go to traditionally published, you're obviously very limited in what you can receive income-wise, because there's so many people working on it. So I do want to go traditionally published. I'm actually working on a book which I'm going to be pitching in October. I'm super excited. And so that one is for the reach that it's going to gain for me. I am not delusioned in the way, unless you're a J.K. Rowling or one of those bigger authors, the income is very minimal from what I've heard from other authors who have gone both traditional and independently published. This is obviously something I've researched. And so I want to do it for the outreach, for being able to put my books into bookstores, because when you are independently published, it's a lot more difficult to do that. So being traditionally published, I'll get some opportunities that I wouldn't necessarily get easily while being independently. So I think it's a bit of the best of both worlds that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And it'll catapult your backlist, because if they find you through the traditional route, you have all of these other books that you're like, all right, come on over. They're here. Just keep on buying them.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm like, here you are. I have the planner ready. I've been waiting for you.
And then so many readers are just binge readers. So once they find an author, they're like, I'm going to read every single book by this author because I'm in love with her. And so hopefully that is the plan. Make that happen. That would be so cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this book that I read of yours, Token Huntress, and it's so beautiful. And I didn't realize that there were 6 in the series when I originally fell upon your series. But after reading the first one, I'm like, so much happened in this first book. Like, what's going to happen next? I'm so intrigued. So tell the listeners here, what is Token Huntress all about?
So summarizing the first book, there are 6 books. I actually just finished the last book, so it's very bittersweet. I actually have the collection here. I'll show you, because I'm like, I love the colors of them. That's 5 of them. Obviously, book 6 has not come out yet, but they're very pretty. That's the first one pretty. That we have. Yes. But Token Huntress was a very different concept for me, because I always said and vowed that I would not write a vampire story, because when I first started writing, Twilight came out. So obviously there was the industry was just saturated with so many takes on vampires, and I went, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. And then my inspiration for Token Huntress came from a dream that I had. And so there is a scene, this isn't necessarily a spoiler, but in the first book, there is a scene where Esmore has been captured, and she wakes up and there's rows of bobblehead dolls, and they're all jittery. She's really weirded out because she doesn't know where she is. And that's where the inspiration came from, the 2 main characters. So basically what Token Huntress is in the world, 300 years from now. And so in the early 2000s, vampires announced that they were here, and humanity and them tried to create a treaty. And as I imagine humanity would go, they just tried to eradicate them instead of making any kind of dealship, which obviously had consequence to it. So then we went into war and all of these things happened. So the humans created what was called hunters. So they were engineered, they were taken basically from the DNA of vampires so they could match them in stamina and speed and all of that good stuff. But the thing was when they turned 18, they would then have a gift. So each of them were individual. They had iridescent eyes to identify who they were. And their primarily goal was to keep the humans safe. Fast forward 300 years where you've been at constant war with 2 different species. They now have human camps. The hunters are in guilds. And basically, they're just trying to eradicate the rest of the vampire council. So setting the scene for it, it's a very dystopian world. It's very cold, it's very dark, there's a lot of fog. It's just the world has reversed. And so Esmore, who has been programmed in only one way, has constantly hunted vampires. And then on her 18th birthday, her gift did not arise, and her iridescent eyes went grey. So there's a lot of curiosity as to what's happening with her origin and behind, but she is a token, which means she is one of the best, one of the most elite, and she leads her team in her guild. And so of course she encounters a very charming Chase, who is a vampire, who saves her in an explosion in a fight that's happening. And so then it's kind of like a captive. She doesn't like him. She's been trained to kill him, but you really can't not like Chase at the same time, because he's so completely opposite to who she is. He's so goofy, he's so carefree, but he is a very powerful old vampire. But he identifies very quickly that Esmore is his familiar, which is basically soulmates, lovers in every life. And so it's kind of the story of enemies to lovers, and Esmore discovering basically what her origin is, that maybe the truths that she's been taught are somewhat lies or just a specific perception. So then she needs to discover for herself what she thinks is right and where she's going to go forward with that. And at the utmost, making sure she tries to protect Chase. So it's a very gritty, dark. There's a lot of fighting. It's very bloody. But yeah, the series I love so much. The first book obviously is just a setting to the series. In the second book, you quickly learn of all these different characters that come into play. And then you've got just different kinds of species of vampires and gifts. And it's just, I just love it so much. Like, it's just so magical, I want to say.
There are these different species that are in your world. There's the hunters, vampires, humans, and also sabers. And like you just said, in future books, there might be other criteria. So what was it that inspired having these different types of people or creatures within this world? Was that something that automatically came to you, or was it kind of tough to put it all together?
It was something that kind of crept up. I think a lot of this series was my longest series. So it certainly taught me a lot about my craft as well, because I am a pantser by nature, so I just write as I go. But I learned quickly, by the time I got to about book 3, I really had to start plotting it a bit more. I sort of already I like the idea of mutation. I don't like that there's just this and this and this, because I think that's so wrong, especially when I've set a world 300 years from now. Of course, there's going to be an aftermath of things like that. So and you do come across other species further in the series. But I think that's why I just wanted to be able to play. I didn't want to limit myself in any way as well. So when I was going through the series, there are additives. Like in the second book, again, this is no spoilers, but you do focus more on the human government and what they've been doing and the experiments that they've been creating, because I think to a degree that's very relatable to what we're living in this day and age. A lot of the things that I've implemented in this, I really wanted us to sort of question our humanity at the same time, because, you know, you have these vampires that are considered as evil, and some of them are. But one of the things that they're really desperately trying to cling on to is their humanity and their self-consciousness. And I just find it interesting that in this, I've displayed that humans have experimented, they've tortured, they've done all these terrible things for power. And I'm like, that's not very different to what our current living situation is, you know. Of course, like conspiracy theories would love it and jump on that. But so I didn't want to limit myself in any way, which is why I decided, okay, I can create any creature in this if I want. I did limit it to a degree, though, comparatively to some of my other series that are very, very hardcore fantasy. But I did want to keep it very focused at the same time, basically on vampire humans. And then there is a third focal that'll come into it, but I don't want to give it away.
Okay. And that was something that I was actually going to ask you about, and you kind of just told us. So the human government, this book is more the hunters who are hybrids, and then the vampires. And so I was going to ask if humans come into play, and you just said they come into play in the future, because I was interested to see, okay, so these humans created these hybrids to protect them. So what are they doing now? Because in the book, it even talks about, are humans capable of protecting themselves anymore? Because the hunters have taken over that role, basically. And then something else in this world is that I find a lot of this happens in dystopian type books, is that the whole idea of like social media and internet, electricity, all this kind of stuff, it's really big right now, but in dystopian worlds, it's not something that has been long lived. It's something that has gone away. And it's not back to primitive life, but it is to a more primitive state than we are now. So what was it that kind of made your wheels turn and go in that direction also?
Yeah, so I actually did, when I first started writing this in 2014, 15, I actually did some research, and I Googled what the world was what they expected the world to be like in 2300s. And it said that in certain parts of the world, it would be so hot that we would not be able to live in it without aircon. And I found that really interesting. So I thought, okay, let's say if we just cut everything out, like everything's done, it's bombed, it's crashed, whatever, what would the world look like then? And then I thought of global warming and things like that. And I was like, okay, would that reverse? And so I've created this as a colder climate. Like everything started, it's not an extinction, so to speak, but everything started reversing without us humans touching it, so to speak, without us having so much gas and so much electricity pumping. of course something's going to happen over 300 years. And I kind of liked that play on it because it did make me think about, well, how would they get around? Like, what would they do? How do they communicate? And the things that we take for granted now as to how they would adapt. And also the thing is, in 300 years, Esmore's 18 at the start. She doesn't know any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, she looks at it, there's one scene where she's sitting on the San Francisco Bridge and she's looking at the rusted old cars and thinking, what an odd thing that must have been. And I kind of like that, because we think of the same thing, 300 years ago. We look at certain things going, how did they do that? Like, what was that for? What was the purpose to that? And I liked that play on it as well. So I think that's why I pursued it going forward. Obviously, there are still bits and pieces here that use generators and electricities and things like that, but they're a rarity. Yeah, I liked that play on it a bit.
Yeah, I really liked that. Another one was the chainsaw, using a chainsaw as a weapon. I loved all of those scenes.
It was such a peculiar thing.
Just so random. I loved it. But it makes sense. It's like, okay, this thing can cut through things. Why don't we use it to kill people? Like, it makes sense, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the characters. So Esmore is our main character. We have her best friend, Dillian. Campture is their leader. We're not going to go into too many details just because it would give away like what happens moving forward. But there is just a list of so many characters. I don't know how you kept it all straight. I was like taking notes because I wanted to make sure I knew every single hunter and what their power was. And it was just such a big world. And I'm excited to see where it moves forward. But I would love for you to tell us, like, who is your favorite character and why are they your favorite character? Or can you choose?
So I actually can, but you haven't yet met this character. So can I still talk about him?
If you want to, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about him. So there is, in book 2, in the human compound, they call it, they go into, there's a lot of characters you'll meet in this book. There's a particular one that she meets, and his name is Lincoln, and his gift is kind of like an illusionist, so to speak, and he's been around forever. And so he gets so bored and he's crazy. And so he was one of the quirkiest, weirdest people I had ever written as a character, because anything went, but to justify his actions and when anything goes was insane. And he literally just decides to help Esmore because he thinks it's going to be a lot of fun. He goes, okay, you're different. There's going to be a lot of war and bloodshed following you. I'm going to follow you. And so he's just crazy, but he's brilliant at the same time. He's so switched on. He's so feared, but he's dancing around and he's singing and he's doing his, like, there's just no coherency about him, but then he's so sharp at the same time. And I just really, really enjoyed creating his character. I think too, I really do like Chase's character as well. Again, he's a quirky person. I enjoy writing quirky characters because he just really balances Esmore. As it's a yin yang situation. Esmore is so straight. She lacks in empathy and emotion. And so she doesn't know how to handle those things. Whereas Chase is almost booming with those things. He's oozing with them and he can't take anything seriously until he really, really has to. And so it infuriates her so much because she doesn't think that he's listening or he's doing the right things, but he's paying attention. He just thinks everyone should have fun until the moment comes down to he has to be a big badass and then he'll do it. But I like their characters and their playoffs and that as well.
Yeah, like you said, it's definitely balanced and it helps her open up a little bit more, which I think she needed because she, like you said, she's so straight and on point with everything. Her job is her life kind of thing. I really liked, there were so many different characters that I liked, but I really liked Whitney. Her whole role within the story, I'm not going to say who she is or what happens, but keep an eye out for her if you're reading it, because she was a good one. I think that it helped Esmore understand where she was. She understands a little bit more because of the help with Whitney. And I like that type of like sidekick kind of character. And I don't know, I was just really drawn to her. So she was one of my favorites. You kind of mentioned it. You have some other series. So without going into too much details, I'd love for you to just tell our listeners, what are the other series that they can go and visit if they're interested in other works of yours?
Yeah, so again, I do write different genres. If you've just read Token Huntress and really enjoyed it, I would recommend the Shadow Minds Journal. So I do only have the first book out at the moment. I love this book. This one is Angels and Demons. It's fantasy. Again, it's futuristic. But Vivian Lair, the main character, she can shift into 7 different demons. So you've got 7 different personalities and concepts happening. And it's just her being like a badass, really. Like, and she won't apologize for who she is and what she does. She's not good. She's very much an anti-hero, but you kind of fall in love with her anyway. She's contracted to the demon lord Haman, who is very possessive. She is his property. So it's a very toxic relationship there. And then you've also got the war angel Gabe, who comes into play. And I like the concept of those two because he wants her to be good and she's never going to be good. It's not who she is. So there's a little bit of a role reversal there, I want to say, as to who's going to shift, what's going to happen. That one's very much focused more on lust than what it is love. And then I have contemporary romance. So I have my Escort series, which is a very short and sweet romance, which I absolutely love, between Clover and Damon. Basically, Clover's a workaholic, and she calls an escort for the night. And then the things that obviously happen thereafter is a happily ever after, clumsy, sort of funny romance. And then I also have young adult. So my first book, The Three Immortal Blades, is about a 17-year-old being thrown into a very different world, discovering that she has powers and getting through that, basically. And Phantom Wolf, which is a very bittersweet one for me. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet, so to speak. It's a 4-book series, 2 books are out, but that one's very, very raw. That one very much focuses on, it has romance in it, but the love that you have for a friend, what you would do for your family. So I really, really love that one. And I also have an erotica series as well, which is pretty straightforward. And that again was just dabbling to see how I went with different genres, what I liked, what I could do, but wasn't drawn to. So yeah, that's what I've got right now.
I love that it's a wide variety, but all of them still tie into that same thread of like love and the deeper feelings. And I think that definitely translates in the words. I mean, I've only read the 1 book of you so far, but I feel like it is very deep and there's raw emotions in there that a lot of authors don't get. And so I'm excited to read through some of your other series. And it's cool that you've also done young adult and erotica. I mean, that's a genre on its own. I love it. So I'm excited to see what's coming next. So are there any projects that you're currently working on that you want to share?
Oh, yes. So obviously I've just finished book 6 in the Token Huntress series. I'm going through the process of publishing that, putting that up on pre-order. The current one that I'm working on, I love it so, so much. This one is a witch series. It's very heavily influenced on themes such as like slavery. Again, I don't really write modern in my fantasy. It's very much sort of a more primitive style, but I kind of refer to it as like the last airbender, so your elementals, and then cross the Witcher. And I just really like this one because it is a love triangle, but the 2 that we're working on at the moment just butt heads like no tomorrow. I just love it. I love it so much because I laugh at my own sort of, they're just snarky at each other all the time, but their actions are very reverse to what they say to each other. So Esper and Regin is their name. And so they just lay into each other. They're so cutthroat, but their actions speak much louder than what they're saying to each other as they sort of resist each other. And I just love that tension and chemistry. But that one, again, is on self-discovery, basically. A lot of trauma in that one. The main witch, I can't give too much away because this one I'm not publishing. I'll be pitching this one. Okay. But it's just very, very different to what I've written previously. So I'm really, really enjoying the dynamics in it.
Definitely. Oh, I'm excited to see what happens. And I'll be following along the whole
Please
way.
Do.
And there's actually a few different ways that people can follow along with you. You have a YouTube channel, and then you're also part of a podcast. So if you want to tell the listeners a little bit about those and how to find you.
Awesome. So I do run my own YouTube channel. So it's called Bound by Books, and it's basically me interviewing fellow authors or professionals with the industry every week. And I upload that interview. Been doing that now for just under 2 years, and it's amazing. Like, it's obviously I'm making connections myself, but it's very interesting listening to people's journeys, how they've come about where they are. Some of them I've interviewed multi-millionaire authors, and so listening to how they've got there, some of their tactics. And I do try to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty as to how and why, because I think that our industry is so saturated with so much information that, especially for newer authors, it's so overwhelming and you don't know where to go. And I think there is no other raw material than talking to somebody that's actually been through it and what has worked for them, because no one thing is going to work for everyone. So it's just basically, and each interview I've had, I'm stealing a little bit of information. I'm like, that could work for me. This could work for me. And you make great friends as well. There's so many amazing people. It's what makes having Zoom and connecting with people. We're in different countries and we're connecting now. It's just amazing. And then I also am a co-host on What the Book podcast. So that is hosted primarily by Cintra Sullivan, myself, and Mark Davis. It's really, and I absolutely love it. It's completely left field podcast. It's very, as Cintra would call it, she calls it, it's Wayne's World. I would say it's kind of like being in the playground as kids tugging at each other's hair while you're talking about books. So it's very cheeky. There's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of puns. And then at the end, we play a game called Book of Feud, which is basically like Family Feud.
Oh, I love
it. And it's so much fun. It can at times be somewhat a little bit, we're adults. Sometimes we make adult jokes. It is fun to, just have that fun, have that every Sunday morning. You have a coffee and you're having a laugh and you're talking about books. And again, you're meeting all different kinds of people. Some are artists, it is primarily around obviously people within the writing industry. But some of those who we interview hasn't even published their first book yet. So it really brings us back to that time when we hadn't yet published. What are the questions that they have? What are their scarcities? And it's great because Mark himself hasn't published a book yet as well. He's still writing his first one. So we definitely have a panel of people in different situations in their career right now. So I think it gives a different perspective as well on it. But I love those guys. They're amazing. Much fun.
So much fun. I've listened to quite a few episodes.
I'm so glad you've been listening. Thank you.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's tough for me to listen live because it's your morning, but it's my late evening. So I usually have to listen to the recordings, but I definitely listen and I love it every single time. Okay, so this wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So I had to make sure that you drink at least a little bit.
Oh, so I do like whiskey. I actually lived in Scotland for just under 2 years and I was a bar wench. And so I went through their large range of whiskey. Unfortunately, I cannot drink it just on the rocks. I'm not that tough. But I do like, I'm not as brave. I'm not as, I'm an amateur. And I got a lot of slack for it actually, because they were Scottish and going, why are you putting Coke in your whiskey? I was like, I'm sorry. But I do like a sweeter whiskey. I'm not a fan of smoky. I will choke on smoky whiskeys. It has been a while though.
All right. So tell our listeners, where can they find you and your books and keep in contact with you moving forward?
Yeah, so I can be found almost everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Kia Carrington-Russell. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can find me with the handle Kia, KIA_Crystal, because that is my middle name. And it just seemed too long putting my last name in as well. And then you'll also find me on YouTube. You'll find What the Book on Podbean. And I have my website as well. And you'll find me on Amazon.
Awesome. And yes, everything will be linked in the show notes so you can go and click on there. But Kia, this was so much fun. I'm so glad that you came on to Read It with Whiskey. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had so much fun.
Talking with Kia was so much fun today. It was great to get to know her outside of social media, and I feel like that is the experience for a lot of the people on my show. I have known them on social media just by following them. Occasionally they'll follow me back, but then it's such a cool experience when you can actually meet. I mean, obviously we're not meeting in person, but we can meet via Zoom and get to know each other, and it's really fun to talk to the other authors, even off of the recording. Usually we do the recording and then afterwards we'll just kind of banter back and forth and talk about whatever we want to talk about. And me and Kia had so much fun talking after we were done recording that I wish it was recording. But we had such a good time. I really didn't realize there was this many books within the Token Huntress series. And so I'm really excited to keep diving into them and get to know Kia through her writing a little bit more. Okay, I hinted at it in the Laura J. Live update, but next week we are talking with Kristen Martin. And Kristen Martin is somebody who I have been following for quite some time. I started following her, I think it was back in 2018, watching her YouTube videos. That was when I was originally toying with the idea of writing a book. I had been starting to pursue my life coaching, and I knew that I wanted to put something together for my clients where I could teach them the concepts that I teach in my coaching, but through a book. So that was something that I was toying with, and I went onto YouTube and I said, hey, how do you write a book? And Kristen Martin popped up. I basically just started binge listening to all of the YouTube videos as I was doing chores around the house or doing whatever I needed to get done. And I really learned a lot from her. I think it was very influential in how I was able to write my book so quickly and get it out to the world. And I talked to her about it within the interview, just telling her that I am so fortunate to have found her, basically. But Kristen is the author of multiple books. We talk about the different series that she has, as well as her nonfiction works. And she also does book coaching as well, helps you to write your own book. So we'll be talking with Kristen next time in the Read It With Whiskey podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you then. You've been listening to an episode of Read It With Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and I just wanted to personally hop in and say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would really appreciate it if you could go onto your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. By rating the show, you're going to help more people find the podcast so then we can grow. Once you review the show, share it on your social media. Share your favorite episode with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.